Hello, I'm Ethan, a New York City small business growth coach, and I wanted to spend today highlighting what I think is a critically important topic of conversation that, frankly, is not being talked about enough. So let's dive into today's video. It is about the atrocious state of the job market, the lies that are being promulgated and thrown back and forth, and hopefully give you a little bit more keen insight into what's going on at a macro level in today's American workforce. So something that I've been hearing over and over again from people who I know in my social circles, my personal and professional networks, is it's impossible to find employment. And that really hit home for me when I live in New York City, when a report just came out from the labor market, Department of Labor, that New York City companies have all but stopped hiring in the first half of this year. So here's the news, and let's dive in from there. So New York City companies have all but stopped hiring. This from the New York Times. Fewer than 1,000 private sector jobs are added in the city of New York. 1,000 jobs. That is the slowest rate of growth in the labor market when you don't take into consideration a recession and the global pandemic. That's the lowest rate of jobs growth here in New York since 2003. So let's kind of take a look at how the trending is going from 2021. You had 200,000 plus jobs in 2021. In 2022, you had a little over 50,000. 2023, you had approximately 15,000. Then you had a little over 50,000 again last year. Only about 1,000 jobs were added in the first half of 2025. This is, talk about understatement of understatements. This is, in no world is this okay. So let's dive in. I want to kind of spend a little bit of time taking a look at this, and then we'll pull back the lens on a national level. So the source of this data is the New York City Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. So this article by Matthew Haig is really insightful. So he writes, back on August 13th, employers in New York City have significantly reduced their hiring in the first half of the year, adding just 956 private sector jobs. That's the slowest growth in payroll outside of any recession in decades. Why? Why are we not talking more about this? So, comparative purposes, during the same period last year, companies in New York City hired 66,000 workers, according to data from the city's Office of Management and Budget, OMB. But companies have since slowed their hiring even further, and major industries that fuel our New York City economy, finance and insurance, hospitality, and yes, retail, have all decimated their hiring. Around the country now, as we kind of pull the lens back on a national level, the labor market has started showing cracks as the effects of President Trump's economic policies have begun to settle in. Tariffs, trade wars. So in other large cities, there's also been really, really slow jobs growth. Metro areas like Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose are all losing a small number of jobs in the aggregate for the duration of this year, the first half of this year. So the New York City economy has gone sideways so far this year, said Mark Zandi, the chief economist at Moody Analytics. New York is a bellwether. It's a leading indicator. And the flattening of the employment activity being witnessed, being felt here in New York City is now ending up being exhibited on a national scale. So the sharp downturn, at least here in New York City, labor market, followed a resurgence last year in the local economy, which emerged slowly from the pandemic, but reached a record level of employment with record bonuses for Wall Street workers. Well, that's typically where the bonuses go first, but that's okay. So I want to share with you a video that is really important. So WTF is happening to the job market. Damon Cassidy, love Damon's work. Suggest you go and check out his YouTube channel, but I'm going to play a little bit of a snippet at the start of the video that he shared. WTF is happening to the job market?
Graduates are facing the worst job market in over a decade, despite the unforeseen economic.
Okay, just very quickly, you're hearing a few narrative threads that I'm going to come back to throughout this video, but one is lack of attention being given to the job market at the highest levels of industry and also government. Also, you hear about the technological advances, most notably AI is having a strong negative anchor weight pulling down available jobs for recent college graduates. Also, Brian Creeley, another amazing thought leader in the space of the job market and what's going on at the macro level. So if you haven't checked out Brian Creeley's YouTube channel, you may want to check that out. It's highly instructive. Okay, this is the moment in time in which I get on my soapbox, but I really want to emphasize a point here that Brian Creeley makes in the video I just shared. The notion of shareholder value is a vestige of a bygone era. It's the 20th century. And as organizations start to think a little bit more expansively about how to retain top talent, how to get employees to perform and produce at a high level, well, one strategy is to not use layoffs as your go-to. If you only have a hammer, every problem is a nail. So this has gone back to the 80s when American car manufacturers, who were leading industry players in hiring in American manufacturing, they all of a sudden had to deal with this thing called Japanese and German imports. And we were, since World War II, not accustomed to competition in the automobile space. So we didn't have American automobiles that could compete from a performance standpoint. What was the answer of those newly minted 30-year-old MBAs back in the 80s? To initiate this thing called massive layoffs. It happened in the 80s, and it's gone on seamlessly for 40 some odd years as the go-to reaction of corporations when they're struggling financially. What's the knee-jerk reaction? Layoffs. And so that is now indicative of a way for companies to achieve continuous quarterly reports, quarterly financial reporting, in their unfortunate singular focus on appeasing shareholders. So we're shifting the model a little bit in the 21st century. We're shifting from shareholder value to stakeholder value. We're seeing a profit-only incentive where employees are considered assets, where they're just managed and you get the most productivity and just discarded. A shift to profit with a purpose. So now organizations are having to contend with this very real reality that if they're going to keep laying off employees, there's only so much blood that you can squeeze from a stone. And we're at that tipping scale point. And I've done over 600 videos on my YouTube channel where I've tried to shine a light on this. But this is now front and center. So I'm going to talk a little bit more, share a little bit more insight, and hopefully this will resonate with you as a founder, as a startup, as a senior executive, as somebody who's a thought leader in the space of HR, or just generally interested in unleashing employee untapped potential. So let's just keep going. And we'll touch on some of these other topics for sure. So I want to play also this interesting snippet and you share your thoughts in the comments on all of this. And this will really highlight some of what I'm talking about. Okay, just very quickly, the notion of work is shifting mightily because the composition of the American workforce is shifting mightily in terms of generations of boomers and matures, tens of thousands of them leaving the workforce voluntarily and not so voluntarily every single day. And in their place is the reconstitution of the job market driven by millennials and Gen Zs who have fundamentally different expectations and understanding of the employee-employer contract. So this is Brian Creeley, he alluded to it. They have different values. They have different expectations of work. And so you're going to need to, as an organization, as a thought leader, as an entrepreneur, as somebody who's starting or growing an organization, you need to capture the shifting landscape of the American workforce. But again, employees want work that's meaningful. They want organizations to exhibit the values that they as employees possess. They want to see their organizations act ethically in their interactions with the communities in which their employees live. So the notion of shareholder value and profit above all else is now being replaced. And organizations are struggling to grapple with this, but it is a state of existence that is driving the future of work. And so we really need to understand this. Okay, so here's a little something that needs to be mentioned. Why should employees, especially millennials and Gen Zs, be loyal to your organization? Why? I cannot tell you the most pervasive comment or excuse I hear from organizations about challenges staffing, building a powerful workforce is COVID. Okay, it was a global pandemic. Yes, we lost 1 million+ Americans. And yes, it's something that all over the world organizations are having to grapple with, is the new nature of work post pandemic. But the other complaint that I hear is, well, Gen Zs are this, they're not that. And mostly matures and boomers kind of rail against these new professionals coming into the job market as lacking trust, loyalty, conviction, work ethic. Well, excuse me, but as you just saw, people seem to forget that there was a recession that was generated by big corporations back in 2007, 2008, mortgage foreclosures, children at impressionable ages, Gen Zs and millennials, saw their parents and grandparents have their houses foreclosed on, their bank accounts frozen, money stolen from them, their jobs taken away. That's what they grew up with. So the notion of loyalty vis-a-vis younger professionals coming in and being willing to work 60, 70, 80-hour weeks, not saying anything, being quiet, getting to the office before your manager gets there, staying after she leaves, that model, that's on you in your myopic, foolish thinking that that is still the prevailing way that employees should think and act and treat their relationships. No, the need for change falls most squarely on organizations. And this, in my consulting practice, is the thing that I'm most often trying to shift the battleship and get it to turn on a dime for mostly corporations, but small to mid-sized firms as well, to rethink the nature of employee engagement, rethink hiring, retention, development, to rethink the relationships they have with their employees. Why? Because you've got three levers to pull in leading your organization for lasting competitive advantage. Strategy is number one. Strategy is absolutely useless if you have a great strategy, but the people you don't have to implement, strategy is useless. Second is operational efficiency, mostly through technological advancements, things like AI, ChatGPT, dashboard reporting, lead gen software. All of that technology, EOS integrators, implementers, all of that stuff, that's not for the select few. That's available to company masses. That's lowest common denominator. So operational efficiency is your second option, is not the great competitive advantage it used to be. So that leaves you with only the third true competitive advantage, and that's your people. That's employees. But again, there's this massive issue going on in the workplace, in the job market. And I am not hearing enough people talking about it, and it needs to happen now. So let's jump right back in to some of what's going on. So I love this Reddit thread just from 9 months ago. Companies are posting fake jobs for a few reasons. Well, why would a company post fake jobs? Well, here's why. I love this response by Platinum92. If you're out there, thumbs up. Companies are posting fake jobs for a variety of reasons. It allows them to both understaff in their organization and say, nobody wants to work anymore. And I've heard that excuse quite often. Two, the company always hiring gives the appearance to their current employees that they are replaceable. Hey, if you don't want to work here, like last Friday when I did a video on the CEO of AT&T saying we've been talking about it since January, but now all 100,000 employees back to work. If you don't share our values, get out of here. You're imminently replaceable. Everybody's replaceable. Three, the notion of posting jobs, even if they don't exist, gives the appearance of a company that's growing. For sure. Love that. Also, and I've been saying this going back to when I was a recruiter, when I first came out of college and started working in 1990. I've been saying this for 35 years. You collect the resumes of candidates and you go through the vetting process so that you have, some leaders like to call it succession planning, but you've got candidates lined up to fill every vacancy at every level of the organization, up, down, and across. An actual open job may have to be publicly posted for a company's own compliance guidelines, even if they have somebody in mind for it. Okay, so there are some things that are going on, and obviously it's companies that are lying about hiring. So I love this point from Huckleberry Top. Exactly, the Platinum's points. Companies have to show that they're an EOE, an equal opportunity employer, so they keep records that they posted on jobs, and they've shortlisted candidates by certain demographic and ethnographic and data. They've interviewed certain candidates, but all the while that they're doing that, they already have somebody lined up. And it's happening with much more frequency. So check this out. And I'm going to focus on big tech. So this is Sherwood News, but big tech isn't hiring like it used to unless you say the magic words. So artificial intelligence is rewriting who gets hired, for what, and why. So Hunsu Rim wrote this article, May 23rd, and I'll link to all of the resources like this one in the description. So if you want to do a little bit more of your own investigative work or you're curious about this, just go check it out, please. They're all in the description. But when big tech started slashing jobs back in 22, it felt like it was a brief and painful correction of rehiring after the pandemic era hiring binge, when Apple, Amazon, Meta, Microsoft, Alphabet collectively, just those organizations, those global corporations, added 960,000 jobs during the peak of the digital demand boom. So when you go to TechCrunch, more than 22,000 US tech workers have been let go this year, including Intel, laid off 20% of its workforce, Meta cut back on its Reality Labs division, Amazon laid off a few employees, Google had back-to-back downsizing rounds, and just last week, Microsoft announced that it was going to lay off 6,000 employees. This is back in May, so it's a little bit dated, but not so much so that you can't discount the trend in big tech cutting back. And you can see the height of hiring at these big tech firms going back to 2020. So there was a significant scale up, and now we're seeing correction. But what's the correction? What are the parameters of that? Why is that even happening? So some notable exceptions: Netflix has been killing it for a decade with just 14,000 employees. And the chip designers and semiconductor manufacturers like NVIDIA and Broadcom, which are driving much of this AI revolution. But those few firms aside, big tech, massive shift back to downsizing. So the pressure is not just about who's being let go, but it's also about who's not being hired. So since February of 2020, US job postings for software development roles have fallen nearly 40%. And IT help desk roles are down 30%, according to data from hiring platform Indeed. So these numbers are significantly worse than any other sectors of professional services like legal and finance, and well below the broader job market, where listings are up 6% at Indeed, going back to May. So tech job postings are still 40% below the pre-pandemic level. So if your focus is on tech, there's a lean movement, right? And so, interestingly enough, CEO Mark Zuckerberg called 2023 the year of efficiency for Meta. It came from rising interest rates, margin pressures, and a reckoning with COVID era overhiring. But now something else is going on in the tech sector, which some experts are calling a very powerful ChatGPT effect. And here, we see, come on, man. How many emails, how many events, webinars are you getting for AI? It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So according to data from the University of Maryland, January research, the number of IT jobs dropped 20% from 2022, the end of 2022 to last year, while AI-related roles jumped 68%. So AI jobs in the aggregate, cumulatively, are outperforming traditional tech jobs. So if you're interested in a career in tech, what this tells us directionally is AI is the way to go. But I'm talking about other issues as well. So I'm talking about a fundamental truism that I do not believe enough people are talking about, and it's making me furious. And we need to have the conversation. Hiring is broken. I'm going to reference this article from Inc. going back to January of this year. But hiring is broken, and not in the way you think. So this from January 2025. As hiring ramps up, managers and job seekers alike face a hopeless cluster. You know what? Apparently, I'm not allowed to say that on my podcast, but as someone who is hired, so I want you to think about this article, okay? Allow me just to go back. So this is Joe Procopio. So he's got a certain background, which makes his perspective unique and extremely interesting. So Joe Procopio said, as someone who's hired all kinds of folks in all kinds of roles in all kinds of companies, industry sectors, I've become increasingly aware of the increasingly difficult proposition of connecting the right person to the right job. And if you have in your social or professional network executive search firms, recruiters, they'll say much of the same thing. I've talked to many recruiters, and this is their perspective. It's getting harder and harder to do an effective job matching the wants, needs, desires of candidates with hiring organizations. But why? Why is that? Recently, I got a totally different view of the problem, and it wasn't great. So over the past 20 years, I personally lucked into transitioning from one job to the next at the right time. I've never had the opportunity or the experience in the modern hiring process from the recruiting table, but I'm getting it now. And again, this is not pretty. And this is in January. About a month ago, I was separated from my position after funding cut, left a choice of me versus them. The organization went with them. So Joe had to work. Yeah, it sucked. But for the first time since the aughts, I found myself in a position to think about and look for my next job. And since I've been writing about the awful, horrible, broken hiring process over the past year, 2024, I was curious to see how it really worked from my own perspective. Oh, Joe, that's unfortunate. Use sarcasm fun, because I, in my late 50s, can tell you that I've been doing job searching since my 20s, and it's never been fun. But march on. So I put together my resume, fired up on LinkedIn, most importantly, got in touch with a few of my friends who are experts in the domain of hiring and recruiting. Was I right? Is hiring broken? Absolutely. Is it even worse than you can imagine? Much so. And if you are going through this, if you went through this or know people who have gone through this, they're going to echo the same sentiment. Universality of horror story after horror story personified. And I see it in my work, coaching organizations, on human capital initiatives, on people first strategies, on building great places to work. Is hiring going to be the biggest and thorniest concern for companies in 2025? I think so. And I'll tell you how to get ahead of it. And the problem begins with both the hiring organizations and job seekers to a lesser extent. But this is what I believe is not being talked about enough, and it needs to be. So how Joe Procopio, went about it. After about 3 months ago, in the middle of my deep dive into all the issues with job seeking and hiring, I had an extended and alcohol-fueled honest conversation with somebody from his social circles, the head of HR and a former tech recruiter who's known for a long time. So I was trying to convince her to give me the secrets to making an impossible task, finding a job, in a world where, and I love this quote, LinkedIn is your daddy and AI is your replacement. And we're all just needles in an ever-growing haystack, might I add, of needles. How do you make this job search thing less impossible? He's hoping that talking to her would have given him advice and counsel on how to navigate through and not make it so insurmountable. But instead, she gave me a tough love advice that I had shared with all of you. HR departments be damned. And I got tens of thousands of likes for it. Then the HR god smoked me back to the unemployment line. So he calls back his tech friend and she says, I'm not hiring. He goes, okay, yeah, that's not why I'm calling. Can you help me craft the perfect resume? Sure, she laughs. Send me what you got. Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that. Recall from earlier in the article, I spent the past 20 years doing one thing that led to another. So I didn't really have a resume per se. However, it's a golden opportunity to create one from scratch that would be perfectly aligned with what a pro like this HR recruiter person is looking for and what she knew others would be looking for. So she helped me to build the perfect resume and make it applicant tracking system friendly, meaning you take your resume, you seed it with a bunch of keywords that have a high incident of match rate, where the algorithms on these job search boards are seeing your resume matching with, let's say, 80+% of the keywords that are important in job descriptions. Then she and a few others gave me a few hours worth of advice, and I go to work building my resume. I apply to all the jobs. Of course I did. I take my 15 years of generative AI and automation skills, worked up some code and some no code to speed up the process. I had quite a bit of help. Over 40 days, I read every word of hundreds of job descriptions. I applied to every position for which I was even remotely qualified, as long as I would be a fit. I didn't want to skew the results. I hand wrote, typed individual cover letters, over 200, and I kept a ton of data. I learned a lot. I learned so much more than I can fit into this column. But here's the headline. And this is what I wanted to share with you today. This is actually when I was looking through hundreds of resources to present to you this kind of thematic idea. The entire concept of the job itself has changed. Let me give you the headline or the takeaway of his experience, Joe Procopio's experience. The entire concept of jobs are changing. I didn't get the job. It was November and December. That was last year. And I'm taking that into account. But whether I got a job became immaterial. Like I said, I had expert help. I had coaching. I had insiders in companies that I was applying to. Those were advantages that many of us who are looking for work can't claim or can't say they've had. After the 100th time I went through a job application process, reading the job post, typing that back to the company's mission and vision statements, customizing the input to personalize it to the opportunity, and then analyzing any feedback I got, the whole thing started to feel futile. So this is going to pull at the heartstrings of any of you who have loved ones or you yourself have gone through this. I expected that experience, Joe says. But after about 50 times, it felt repetitive and demotivation. Then at about 100, all I could see were holes and dead ends and failure waiting to happen on both sides of the recruiting table, the organization seeking candidates and the candidates. It became the biggest, longest, lowest return on investment project in my 25-year career. Stop me if you've heard this. That's the headline. The problem isn't only the job search in today's job market. The solution, more, is going to come. But it isn't just a tight job market. It's not your run-of-the-mill pendulum swing to the employer. You've got CEOs who are saying, I'm of the opinion that AI can already do all the jobs that we humans can do, without any sense of irony or fear of karma smiting them or lightning striking them dead on the spot. So maybe it's not about finding a job. Maybe the problem is finding a job. Companies are rethinking the relationship between employee and employer. They're rethinking hiring. And now here's what makes it significantly harder. Going back to the middle of last year, June 2024, I saw this article in Fortune and I thought it was really interesting. Sydney Lake, an associate editor at Fortune, really hits the ball out of the park on this one. So I want to just kind of share a few thoughts. Bosses are lying to burned out employees by posting fake jobs to give false hope that help is on the way. So this wasn't another reason on that Reddit thread I shared why companies are posting false job postings, but it's a really important insight. Applying for a job can be tedious and frustrating enough, especially if the role you applied for doesn't even exist. And this is one of the starkest realities that I've seen in doing research, and also in my consulting practice. The practice of posting non-existing jobs has grown. When you look at a research organization from Resume Builder, shows 40% of companies are posting fake jobs. 14%, 2 out of every 5 companies are posting fake jobs in the last year. And 3 in 10 companies still leave those jobs up on job posting sites. To the job seeker, this can certainly seem shady, but 70% of hiring managers believe that posting a fake job is morally acceptable, according to this study. Are you effing kidding me? Are you kidding me? The reasons why hiring managers would do this are plentiful. Okay, so we understand the rationale, even if it may not make sense to job applicants. Some hiring managers use it as signaling to burned out employees in the organization that help is on the way, while others do it to dip their toe in the shallow end of the job market, benchmark salaries and benefits among competitors, and make it appear as if they're staying on top of DE&I initiatives. I should say, lacking in ethics organizations, other organizations do this to build a pool of potential candidates that they can contact when an actual vacancy arises. Lauren Winnan, CEO and principal HR consultant for the HR consultancy Next Level Benefits, shares with Fortune this information. But what's most alarming is that some employers use the posting of false jobs as a scare tactic to signal to current employees, we can replace you at any time. So check this out. One part of business practice has always relied on misinformation to attempt to keep employees feeling afraid and insecure, says Daniel Boskeljohn, an executive coach and co-founder of business consultancy Healthy Relationship Academy. Many illogical motives may inspire this act. It could be wanting employees to believe that they won't be as badly overworked, to make employees feel insecure, or to send a message to rival companies. I think this is critically important insight, but I don't necessarily get bogged down in the rationale or the defense of such morally bankrupt behavior by organizations. I look at the impact from a mass scale. Look at the job market and look at candidates, whether you're just coming out of college or you're somebody who's transitioning after 20 or 30 plus years of work. It has a universally profound negative toxic impact. And there's an aggregate result to this. And so when hiring managers, when executives point to people quiet quitting and checked out, and they're not engaged and they're not performing and producing as high as senior leaders expect to be able to make those monthly and quarterly financial performance goals, all of a sudden we're shocked that this is the outcome, the aggregate macro impact. So I want to take you back to earlier this year, March 2025, in Market Watch, another financial reporting organization. So Andrew Keshner, in this article, it's getting uncomfortably difficult to find a job. Here are the bright spots in the labor market. So again, I'm trying to keep somewhat neutrality or objectivity by swaying the pendulum back to the positive side of the ledger. While the latest report, the job report, is giving job hunters the jitters, longer stretches of unemployment and more part-time work, I guess, as a vehicle for compensation to financially be able to make your bills, to pay your bills every month. So even before the release, and this is going back to the first quarter of the year, but even before the release of Friday's employment report, the labor market was beginning to test the nerves of American job hunters. So this is going back to early this year. This isn't a recent last week phenomenon. Now that the numbers are in, experts say there isn't much that will counter the queasiness for those of us who are looking for work. In other words, don't start chugging the Pepto-Bismol, but keep it close by. It remains uncomfortably difficult for unemployed people who want a job to quickly find one, said Corey Stahl, an economist at Indeed Hiring Lab. This is going back to February. As I said, this report was published in March, going back to that last monthly data in February of 2025. The US economy added 151,000 jobs, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which was okay, but not that close to the targeted 170,000 jobs that were expected at economists at Wall Street Journal. The jobless rate is ticking up to 4.1%. This is back in March. An even broader measure of unemployment when you factor in those people with some kind of work part-time, a few hours, some kind of marginal work. They're not officially unemployed. When you look at their unemployment rate. It ticked up from 7.5% to 8%. And then what you see is, at a macro level, a shrinking work week in the American job market. We're shrinking down to 31.1 hours a week, which is unchanged. This is in February from March. Overall, the job numbers were a bit of a snoozer, said Julie Pollack, chief economist at ZipRecruiter. But the reduction in the average employee work week, it's getting smaller, is of particular concern. So according to Julie Pollack, the 34-hour average work week is a level rarely seen outside of a recession. The drop in hours worked per week, aggregate average across the workforce, combined in the rise in the number of workers who are forced into part-time jobs for economic reasons, suggests that employers are cutting back on hours rather than cutting jobs outright. Okay, as if you've watched my other videos, you know I am incredibly passionate about organizations not conducting layoffs. I think it's pure cowardice and evil. But you would see that the average number of employee hours worked per week is constricting as organizations don't want to lay off employees, but they keep the financial, they're between a rock and a hard place. So you see that coming in as well. So the last thing I want to go back to is this dishonesty in hiring. So I'm going back to November 2023. So this one goes back a little bit, but this is from SHRM, the acknowledged de facto expert in the field of HR, in terms of organizational assessment of work and employees. So going to the Society of Human Resource Management, November 2023, Dishonesty in Hiring by Kylie Ora Lobel. It's no surprise that candidates lie to get ahead. According to a recent survey from Resume Builder, a resume service company based in Seattle, 32% of Americans admit to lying on their resume. I don't want to go into this aspect, but I want to flip the switch to organizations and hiring managers who are lying. So many job seekers operate believing that if they can just get in front of the hiring manager, they'll be able to impress them enough to receive a job offer, says Amanda Augustine, a certified career coach and resident career expert at Top Interview. So that's the candidate side. I don't want to spend too much time in there. So many career experts say they tend to give candidates the benefit of the doubt when they stretch the truth. We understand that. We know that that's what's going on. But here's what I want to end with today. When hiring managers are dishonest, perhaps more surprising than candidates fibbing on their credentials, experience for purposes of perhaps increasing the likelihood of getting an offer, perhaps more surprising, while dishonesty among job candidates is prevalent and even accepted to a certain extent, many hiring managers also admit to lying during the hiring process. Check this out. According to another Resume Builder survey of more than 1,000 hiring managers, the vast majority, 80%, say that lying is very acceptable, which is 14% say that, or somewhat acceptable, 66%, at their company. To 80% collectively say lying is okay by a hiring organization. So 36% of hiring managers admit they've lied to candidates about their company or the role they're seeking to fill. And of that group, 75% say they were dishonest in the interview, 52% in the job description, and 24% when they send out the offer letter. Are you kidding me? The most frequent lies are about the position's responsibilities and growth opportunities. Here's my takeaway, an anecdotal, subjective takeaway. They tend to understate the scope of work, and they tend to overstate the opportunity for career advancement. And here's the sad part. This organizational lying to job seekers apparently works. Why do I say that? Well, when you consider that 92% of hiring managers report that a candidate that they lied to accepted their job offer. With the pressure to bring on talent in this climate, hiring managers are also lying about the role and responsibilities as well as growth and career development, says Stacy Haller, Chief Career Advisor at Resume Builder, giving insight into the results of the survey they conducted. No one who is tasked with recruiting candidates wants to admit that their company is dysfunctional or its work environment is toxic. Amanda August. So I'm not going to read the rest of this. You can kind of read it at your leisure. All the links to these resources are below, but I want to end with where we began today. The state of our job market is in crisis. The state of the future of the American worker is in crisis. I have been saying this for a while. You see some permutation of this in all 600 plus of my videos on my YouTube channel, where you can go through the playlists and see about the different advice and counsel I give CEOs and startups and executives, as well as the spotlight I shine on organizations that are doing a great job to build amazing workplaces and those that are exhibiting less than stellar track records of treating their employees a certain way. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. In the aggregate, we know that we are in transformational times. So I leave you with a thought. What is your organization doing specifically with respect to two key considerations? Rethinking the relationship you have with your employees and building a truly powerful organizational culture with a great reputational brand that will enable you and your leadership team to gain lasting competitive advantage over those other organizations who are exhibiting this kind of ethically challenged behavior. If you like the video, please give me a like. I'd love to know what you think. If you check out my YouTube channel and you think I'm doing good work, please give me, just hit that old subscribe button. It'll really support the work that I'm doing to help organizations unleash their people's untapped potential. Thank you so much. Take care.